I work with the media, so it's a very complicated job, I have to say, because the one of the problems we have in this moment here, in this moment we have in general on migration is the toxic narrative about migration issues, which is something that actually is not getting better. I remember in 2013 when we were in Lampedusa, all European politicians, including Barroso, President of the European Commission, they arrived in Lampedusa and said never again after the shipwreck, which caused the death of 368 people. And after 10 years, we have registered 26,000 deaths in the Mediterranean. So we have to say that, and the narrative around migration is not improved, but it's getting worse and worse. So it's very complicated. We have to question also our work. Maybe we didn't work so well. We have to rethink our work. We as a professional working for United Nations, international organization, and journalists as well, because we were not able to change the narrative on migration. So this is one thing that we have to keep in mind. This panel is about humanitarian assistance and human rights, and that's very interesting because, again, situation has not improved in this particular context. I have to say that it is quite clear that the political interest and the will to work on humanitarian issues has declined dramatically in the last few years, to the point to become almost irrelevant politically. So if we have a look at what the European Union is doing right now, it's just carrying out policies which are focused on closing borders and not providing assistance to those arriving by sea. And again, also the narrative about migration is totally wrong, because this year we have registered the arrival of 65,000 migrants to Italy, and which is not a big number. This is not an emergency in terms of number, but if you have a look at the newspaper or the media, and if you hear the politicians, it looks like a huge crisis. But it is not even comparable with what we have seen in 2015, with the arrival of almost 1 million migrants and refugees from Turkey to Greece, and is not even comparable to what happened last year from Ukraine, when millions of people flew the war. And Europe had the capacity to provide an excellent answer to this humanitarian crisis. 4.8 million protection were provided to Ukrainians fleeing the war. And now we are seeing just a few thousand migrants arriving from Africa, and the approach is totally different. So, and this is something that we have to think about. 65,000 people is 0.2% more or less of the 16 million people living in Italy, and even less considering that in Europe we are 450 million people more or less. So what is wrong? The narrative is wrong. Of course, the point that all the policies are focused on security, on borders, and not on humanitarian assistance. And we have been talking about the fact that it's very complicated to get a visa to come to Europe. So there are no regular entry channels to this continent, just a few, family reunification and just special entry programs, but nothing specific. And also the fact that there is this narrative against economic migrants. No? We say a lot of people, a lot of politicians, a lot of media are saying that migrants coming to Europe by sea are not migrants fleeing wars, but because in their countries of origin there are no wars. But again, this is not right. I mean, migration it's a complex phenomenon, and in this complexity, we see also that those migrants arriving now, there are migrants. Many of them, they are not fleeing their countries of origin, but their countries they are fleeing abuses, violence, human rights violation. They are subjected in their countries of transit or destination. We've been seeing what is happening now in Tunisia, and I've been in Lampedusa a few weeks ago, and I can confirm the overall majority of sub-Saharan migrants arriving to Lampedusa, they are fleeing the country because of the discrimination and they are experiencing right now. And we know very well what is happening in Libya with all the torture, abuse, human rights violations. So saying that we just will welcome refugees but not all other migrants is not right. And we have also to say that even if these migrants are not going to be protected under the Geneva Convention, they can be protected under other international treaties which have been signed by the European member states and Italy. So we have to change all the narrative about who these people are. And this is quite complex. And the 5 minutes are gone. I mean, they're so fast. And I have to say that another just final point among the other points that I'm not going to treat, apparently, is that migration is not just a humanitarian issue. It's one of the biggest geopolitical phenomenon of this century. So it's something that is here to stay. So even politicians trying to close in borders and all these short-term policies that are just looking at next 3 months, next elections, they are wrong, because we know very well that in Europe, by 2050, we will have the decrease by 20% of people at working age. We will have an increase by 47% of people at retirement age. So it is clear that in 20 years, Europe will need migrants, and we need migrants right now. So we need long-term policies that will be able to manage the phenomenon of migration with a balanced approach, not just only closing borders, but also opening regular entry channels, not only for people fleeing wars, but also for the so-called economic migrants. So if we just keep aside the humanitarian part of the phenomenon, we also have to see that the failure of politicians right now is not to see the economic side, which is also very important. So we must do something in order to change this narrative. It's very important to work on education. It's very important, and we have to change the narrative. And probably we also have to find partners, because as international organization and civil society, we are not very well heard by politicians and by politics. So we need some partners, maybe the private sector, which are, for example, one of the subjects which is really interested in changing these things, or not for humanitarian purposes, of course, but again, they can be part of the conversation. So it is very important. And just the last point about Lampedusa, you know that we're working a lot as a USAG with victims of trafficking. And this is something which is still going on. We have been working as IAM for years in Lampedusa with a special program focused on victims of trafficking. It has not been renewed since 2020. So in the last 3 years, there is not a specific project assessing vulnerabilities and the needs of potential victims of trafficking, especially now from Ivory Coast. There are a lot of women from Ivory Coast who are potential victims of trafficking, and there is a lack of intervention in that case. So we are quite concerned about that specific issue. So I wanted to underline that, because I know that you're very interested in this specific, on this specific phenomenon.